tonight's class, we're going to do the first half of the evening with on Daniel chapter 8. The second half is going to be review. For those who are taking it for audit, stay for the review. It'll be fun. We're going to do a lot of questions. We're going to get the information on the midterm out of you, not out of me. So let's see how much you know tonight. And next week, if you're not taking it for credit, we'll have an hour of instruction, and then we'll have time for the test. And take it, try it. See, you have nothing to lose here. And of course, the review is really, we want to remember these things. That's what the review is for. So it's really an important part of the class, whether you're credit or audit. All right, let's pray. Father, bless this portion, this part of the word to us, that we would learn of you and learn the history of your people, and Father, of even history that has not happened yet, of things to come. Bless this to us, Father, and that this would have a place in us sharing it with others. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. I may mention that. How does a class like this help you go soul winning? And I'm going to give you this is my little spiel on this thing. When you meet someone for the first time and you're sharing Christ with them, a stranger or even a family member, if you know enough Bible to sound intelligent, you're not genius, just intelligent. Like this guy sounds like he knows what he's talking about. He's got a few facts and figures here. He seems to have an understanding of this thing. That creates some trust. And if they have questions, they have Bible questions, they will come out. Because this guy seems to know the book. So, it also may help you a little bit of confidence. When someone asks you questions, you're prepared. They ask you a question, you're prepared to give an answer. So all the background information, the facts and figures, the details of the book, it really does help you, because when you start sharing Christ with people, if you will, a million and different things come up. And you want to create trust. You want them to believe that you know what you're talking about. Now, you don't have to have a huge, deep theological understanding. Some simple facts here and there, understanding basic things. And that will help your testimony, it'll help your credibility. And I think also your confidence, which is important, that you're confident that I can speak for the Lord here and I have something to give someone and I know something. So, let's continue here. We're in Daniel chapter 8. If you have your Bibles to look along, that will help, because sometimes there were notes in the scriptures. You can see what's going on here. In a sense, this is one of the easier visions, because at the end of the chapter, Daniel is given an interpretation from none other than the angel Gabriel. So, it's a pretty good source. So we're told exactly what it means. But the history of this is really a fascinating vision here. To begin with, I'll mention, we said that this book, Daniel, began in Hebrew, switches to Aramaic, and then back to Hebrew. So, from chapter 2, verse 4, B, right in the middle of the verse, to 7:28 is in Aramaic. So when we get to chapter 8, we're back in Hebrew. And we said, though, critics have loved to bash the book because it's in these two languages, which Daniel knew both of. Okay? The proof is that, and we mentioned this last week, is that it's the Hebrew of the 5th or 6th century BC. It's the Aramaic of the 5th or 6th century BC, which means either someone who was a prophet foretold future events, or some lunatic just guessed and got everything right from the 5th or 6th century. Okay, you have two choices here, because it's prophetic, it's historical. Several things he said happened. They were future events. They've happened now. It's proof. So we have a proven prophet here. He's prophesied things that they have happened, and we know when the book was written, and it had to be written by someone who had been given the future by God. So the two languages, if you will, gives us a double proof, and that's what you need to know about it. If you ever get someone, Daniel was written in two different languages, someone put something in there, and you just go after them for what I just told you. You just go after them. So I have double proof that this is prophecy fulfilled. All right. Now, let's take a look at the map as we go through this here. In Daniel 8:1, in the 3rd year of the reign of King Belshazzar, a vision appeared unto me, even unto me Daniel, after that which appeared unto me at the first. And I saw in a vision, and it came to pass when I saw that I was at Shushan in the palace, which is in the province of Elam. And I saw in a vision, and I was by the river of Ulad, which is actually what we would call Canaan. Now, let's zoom in here a little bit here. I think you can see this. I'll point. There is Babylon, but the Babylonian Empire, which was taken over by the Medes and the Persians, extended beyond the city of Babylon. So here we are at Shushan. This is the city where the story of Esther took place. Xerxes, her husband, built a magnificent palace there 100 years after these events. But it's that same city. It was always a large city in this empire. So this is where he is, and he's by the canal or river, whatever you want to call it, and he has this vision. Let's go from there. Okay. This is interesting. This picture you're looking at was taken from that palace. I'm not sure what time period, but this is some of the artwork that they dug up and reassembled from the palace in Shushan. It was a magnificent place where he was, but he was a servant. He was serving there. So, the vision recorded by Daniel in chapter 8 came to him 2 years after the vision of chapter 7. So, we're going 2 years into the future from last week, in the reign of Belshazzar. And in this vision, Daniel sees himself in the palace, and sometimes they call it Shushan, sometimes they call it Susa, one of the Persian royal cities, more than 200 miles east of Babylon. And here's the name of the canal, again, where it is. So we know where this is, and, it's a major city, so he's a servant. He has business there, apparently. He is there. And I mentioned Xerxes, a century later, will build a magnificent palace there. It will be the scene of the book of Esther. And Nehemiah was King Artaxerxes' cupbearer in the same palace. So, Nehemiah, Esther, and this vision of Daniel all took place in this city. Now, here it gets back into symbols and types here. And I lifted up my eyes and I saw, behold, there stood before the river a single ram which had 2 horns. Now, I've done this from the Amplified because it puts in the answers for you, if you will. So it just makes it a little easier to do that way. 2 horns representing 2 kings of Medo-Persia, Darius the Mede and Cyrus. And the 2 horns were high, but one, Persia, was higher than the other, and the higher one came up last. Now, so he says that, you see a ram with horns. The horns are the same size, but not this horn, not these horns, because they represent 2 kingdoms. The Medes is a kingdom that preceded the Persians. But the Persian Empire, which joined with the Medes, became a greater and stronger empire, but a later one. So the horn that came to, the last horn is the bigger horn. So they're unequal. We go back a chapter. Remember the bear? Leaning on one side, one shoulder up, one down. The higher shoulder represents, again, the Persian Empire, which was the greater empire. So he's using a different animal to represent a kingdom that we've already looked at. Now, I looked and saw the ram, Medo-Persia, pushing and charging westward, northward, and southward. No beast could stand before him, neither could anyone rescue from his power. But he did according to his own will and pleasure and magnified himself. You say, well, what did the Medes and the Persians have that enabled them to establish this huge empire? And I checked up on them. At one point, they had a 2 million man army. You can imagine that in ancient times. And with that 2 million man army, they went rampaging and conquering. So, nothing could stay. Imagine 2 million soldiers showing up at your city. This is like, they had a huge military force, and they used it. So, this is their empire. So, what happens to them here? Next, in the vision, Daniel saw a ram with 2 long horns near the canal. And I don't know if I have to read all this. We've done this already. Yes, we've talked about this. Let me go on from this. We've covered this. Okay. Next, in 8:5, and as I was considering, behold, a he-goat came from the west on the face of the whole earth, and touched not the ground. So now we have a flying goat. Some of you have seen pictures of mountain goats. A mountain goat can, take a 20, 30, 40-foot leap. They can fly. Okay, anybody have seen a clip of it, such a thing? I've seen one. Okay, they off they go. But anyways, we have this flying goat, but he only has what? One horn. Okay, and the interpretation of the thing here. And he came to the ram that had two horns, which had seen standing before the river, and ran into him with the fury of his power. And I saw him come close unto the ram, and he was moved with choler against him, and smote the ram, and brake his two horns, and there was no power in the ram to stand before him. But he cast him down to the ground, and stamped upon him, and there was none that could deliver the ram out of his hand. So, we have this battle going on between these two animals. We know that the ram is the Medes and the Persians. The goat here is Alexander the Great. You say, well, how did he become a goat? In the previous chapter, he was a leopard with wings. He was so fast, his army moved so terrifically fast. By the way, that seems to be the genius of his military might. He would take a smaller army and strategically and quickly attack and cause panic in his enemies, and if they panicked, you win, because they retreat. And so with a smaller army, he was able to defeat the Medes and the Persians. But this was part of his strategy. He had a well-trained army, but no 2 million man army, not even a 1 million man army. Much smaller than that, but trained, and of course he went across the known world, all the way to India. So, now, Gabriel does the interpreting here in verse 20 and 21. Gabriel first interprets the meaning of the two-horned ram. The beast represents the Medes and the Persians. The same empire, as I mentioned, with a bear raised up on one side in chapter 7, verse 5. Though Persia rose up later than the Medes, the Persians compared to centured with the Media. Okay, we've looked at this. Now, the second horn on the ram was larger. Okay, we've done this. Let's keep going here. I mentioned here that the Persians had a 2 million man army, and that Alexander the Great actually was able, I'm not sure when he attacked, it was actually, I can't remember, it was 2 or 3 decisive battles before he defeated the Medes and the Persians. But he was definitely outnumbered, but he was not outskilled. And so military commanders today still study the tactics and the army and the structure that Alexander used to win this great. If you're a military man and you study battle and warfare, you study Alexander the Great to this day, what he did. How can you win with a smaller army? And he was able to do it. So, just a little history of Alexander here. His father really gave him much of his training. Philip II of Macedonia, he's in Macedonia just above Greece. And he conquers all of the Greek states except for Sparta. So he did what the Greeks were never able to do, unite themselves. So he has Macedonia and all these Greek city-states, and they're in what's called the Corinthian League. But then he soon dies. And his son, who had been serving in the military under him while he conquered Greece, Alexander, he was in charge of what's called the Companion Cavalry at the age of 18. So he'd seen military duty, he'd been a commander, his father dies, and his father's dreams of a great empire, Alexander takes that dream and goes with it. So he was able to defeat the Persian Empire, the Egyptian Empire, extend the borders of the empire all the way to India. There were some amazing conquests along the way. He defeated Tyre, which is a city north of Israel. It's an island just off the coast, a very wealthy city-state. He defeated it in 3 months. It took Nebuchadnezzar 8 years to defeat that city. He did it in 3 months. He just built the land strip, a causeway out to the island, and then attacked, instead of trying to do it by ship or starving them to death. So, all of his conquests, the thing that always, how would you say, his, characterized him is he rapidly defeated enemies. And so the world was just shocked at the success of this man militarily. Now, gets interesting. Why is Alexander called a goat? You're seeing a picture there of the Oracle of Delphi. If you lived in Greece in this period of time, and you needed an important decision, you had an important decision to make, you would travel. This Delphi is not easy to get to. Sometimes they travel by foot several days because it's in a place that's mountainous, or you'd have to take a ship to get it from one side, but it was difficult to get to. You would want a message from the oracle. And the oracle is always a woman, and Delphi, the Greeks considered it to be the navel of the world. Your belly button, your navel. And there were several cracks in the rocks there where steam came up. And so to the Greeks, this represented, from the navel, something coming up from the navel of the earth. And they put her on always a tripod. You can see the two legs, but there's a third leg there. A three-legged stool on top of this rock with these vapors coming up. Now, archaeologists have studied these vapors to see if it really kind of, puts you in an altered state of consciousness. They think it did. There's actually, there's faults there. They can see where this could happen. But you would go to the Delphi, the Oracle of Delphi, and then you give her question. And then she would sit on her stool in some kind of a trance, and then she would just start spieling off things. And often what she said made no sense at all, like you needed a massive interpretation to understand what this woman said. But here is the story of someone going to the oracle, and this is the message they got. Here's how it works. As I was considering, behold, a he-goat. This is interpreted in Daniel 2:21 to be the king or kingdom of Grecia, or Greece. A goat is very properly made the type of the Grecian or Macedonian Empire, because the Macedonians at first, about 200 years before Daniel, were dominated, I have trouble saying this, it's called I think you would say Aegean, or the goat's people. That was their name. They were called the goat's people. And upon this occasion, which again, this is what the author here, Karanas, says this. Their first king was going with a great multitude of Greeks to seek a new habitation in Macedonia. He was commanded by the oracle to take the goats for his guides to the empire. Oh, the oracle says, follow the goats. The goats are going to show me what to do. That was the message he got from the oracle. So, here's what he does. And afterwards, seeing a herd of goats flying from a violent storm, he followed them, interesting, to Edessa. And there he fixed the seat of his empire, made the goats his ensign or standard, and called the city Aegea, which means the goat's town. So this ancient Macedonian king follows the goats. The place where he sets up his kingdom or empire, he calls Goat Town. And the people, Aegea, are the goat's people. So, if you're a Macedonian ruler after this time, your people live in Goat Town, and you are the goat people. And this is the story behind it. So, when Daniel has his vision and represents Alexander as a what? A goat, he's taking it from this history. This is where this is all coming from. Now, remarkable here, the kings of Macedonia were buried in this city. They were buried in Goat Town. It is also very remarkable that Alexander's son, he married just once a woman named Roxana, and he had a young son who was murdered soon after his death. But the son, his name, Agus, means son of the goat. That's what he called his son. So, are we surprised here that Daniel has a vision and he sees the goat with one horn? These are the people of the goat. This is the king of the goat, and he's got his name, his son of the goat. Now, all of a sudden, you say, well, now I see where they got the goat from, okay? And of course, there's two ways to think of a goat. You can think of one of those, you ever seen a goat that'll chew on tin cans, paper, this is real garbage eaters. Or you ram with a horn, like about, 3 feet round, a coil ready to, knock you over. That's the That's the image they were really thinking of, I believe. So, and some of Alexander's successors are represented on their coins with goat's horns. Any questions on this now? I mean, this is the history of it. I thought you just smile like, where did they get these things? Guy becoming a goat suddenly. It was a long-standing thing here. So, Daniel then saw a goat with a powerful single horn arise suddenly from the west. And this is Alexander, of course. His speed was so great that his feet did not touch the ground. The goat, determined to destroy the two-horned ram, went at him in great rage, furiously broke the ram's two horns. The ram was powerless to defend himself, and the goat subjugated the ram. The greatness of that ram now belonged to the goat. Previously, none could escape from the ram's power. Now, none can escape from the goat's power. So you see, we transfer from one kingdom to the other. Let's see if I've mentioned all this. I have a date here. He began his conquest in 334. When I'm not sure if it took him 12 or 13 years to so-called conquer the known world, but it was very quick. And the Persians were not able to stop him. But soon, as we mentioned last week, soon after he had, created this huge empire, he is living in Babylon. His purpose was to rebuild and restore Babylon as the head of his kingdom. Interesting. He wanted Babylon to be a great city again. But he dies of malaria and alcoholism. Okay? At this very young age. And we mentioned last week, he could be vicious. He was known for some of his advisors and friends to murder them. He had a dark side. And his kingdom did not last long. Now, you can take a look at the route here. You see Macedonia where he starts, and then, travels down, if you will. I go back here. He makes his way down to Egypt. Okay. Conquers there, and heads across all the way, and this is to India. And then this circling up here again, this puts him in Babylon. That's where he is again. So we see his conquest, either 12 or 13 years for him to do this. He dies at the age of 32, very young. Now, interesting enough, the next thing we see in Daniel 8:8 is 4 horns here. The one is broken off, and then we see 4 horns. And I did not realize, and I started looking on the internet, there is such a thing as a 4-horned goat. This is a real, some goats have 4 horns. So this is a symbol here, but there's actually a real thing to match it. Therefore, the goat waxed very great. When it was strong, the great horn was broken, and for it came up 4 notable ones towards the 4 winds of heaven. As soon as Alexander the Great dies, we're not sure who, we suspect the general under him in that region. Systematically, all his relatives were murdered. His widow was murdered. His young son was murdered. Anybody who was a relative who could have taken the throne for him was also murdered. So, a few years later, finally, a decision is made to divide the kingdom amongst his 4 generals. But probably because one of those generals and some other politicians were having everyone in his family murdered. Well, his empire is over. His family is done. They're gone at this point. Now, this picture shows you the names of the 4 generals that took control, and they divided the empire. And the ones we're going to look at the most here is in Egypt and Judah were under the Ptolemies. And there's a number of kings. They ruled this region for hundreds of years. And then this group here, Syria and Babylon, the Seleucids here. These 2 empires, in between them is Israel. And their goal always was to conquer Israel and the Jews and use them as a buffer state, to protect themselves from the other empire and to, if you will, stage an attack from there if they were going after the other empire, which they did. The control went back and forth. So even though it started with 2 of Alexander's generals, these generals' empires fought with each other for hundreds of years. And unfortunately, Israel is the middle of this thing. Well, Is Israel in the middle of this thing today, folks? Yeah, same craziness going on. So, in this case, history hasn't changed much. Let's see. There's just a couple of good things here. Remember the image? The Grecians, the Macedonians were bronze, and what would be and then the bronze hips and thighs, and then the leper with 4 heads and wings, and now the goat. Okay, with the horn is broken, 4 generals or 4 horns take over. So this is the history of the thing. You have to remember, this has not happened yet when Daniel has his vision. Yes, you could say, well, you know, he was still alive when the Medes and the Persians took over, but he was not alive when they were defeated by Alexander the Great. You have to go a good deal into the future. Daniel's from 605 BC. Look at the date of this. This is a kingdom in 333. You know, and the dates of his life here, 333. This would be the dates of his rule as a king. You know, hundreds of years later, if you will, almost 300 years later, Daniel is foretelling the future. Now, we mentioned no heirs, so this is the division of the kingdom. We talked about them, and I think what you need to remember for the class is that Ptolemies, that line from that general, controlled Egypt and parts of Asia Minor, and the D1, Seleucus, his descendants, you know, would be Syria, Mesopotamia, and often Israel. So those 2 kingdoms would battle one another, and the Jews would be involved in that and terribly hurt because of it. So, let's go from there. There are 2 different symbols of Alexander the Great, of his kingdom, of the Macedonian Grecian kingdom. And the culture that went with it, I forget the reason for it, but it's usually called the Hellenistic culture. And they would talk of Hellenizing a culture, meaning bringing in Greek culture, which brings in idol worship. And it was shockingly different from Jewish culture. So the Jews really, if you had any kind of faith in God and in the scriptures, you would hate this process. For instance, in a Greek city, you would always have a gymnasium. And at the gymnasium, they would have wrestling matches. Well, the Greek wrestlers wrestled naked. Now, of course, you've read enough of the law of Moses. It's a shame for a man to be naked, for anyone to see a man naked. And so, you know, I'm not going, get that disgusting thing out of here. You know, so, oh, this is fun, they're wrestling, this is part of the life of the Jews. It's forbidden, it's against the law of Moses, it's disgusting, these heathen run around naked. So there was always a clash between these cultures. They didn't blend well together. They really did not, for many ways. Are we going to pray to God, or are we going to go to the oracle in Greece to find out what's going to happen next? I mean, you know, it's very, very different. So, let's see here. I think we can move on from there. Okay. Now, this is where it gets interesting, and this is part that most Christians are unaware of, who this is and who it's talking about. In Daniel 8:9, out of one of them, means from the 4 horns, out of one of them came forth a little horn, which waxed exceeding great, towards the south, towards the east, and towards the pleasant land. The pleasant land is Israel. When you see that term, the pleasant land, it's speaking of Israel, meaning that to God, Israel has a special place. It's beautiful in His eyes, if you will. Now, this insignificant one, this little one, who is it and what is he doing? I think I'll read the commentary out here, read the whole thing out. Out of one of the 4 horns came another horn. It had an insignificant beginning, but it exerted power southward, eastward, and towards the beautiful land. That is the land of Israel. He became a great persecutor of the people of Israel. They are termed the host of heaven because they are God's people. They are saints. So that's how it's used. The host of heaven will represent Israel in this prophecy. And he subjugated that nation. He trampled on them. He set himself up as Israel's king, calling himself the Prince of Hosts. Now, I want you to see this is Antiochus IV. That is his name.